Usually, like when you look at the stock market and you see a massive, just catastrophic drop in a company's value, the diagnosis is fairly straightforward. It's binary.
Right, yeah. Like they missed earnings or something.
Exactly. You pull up the financial charts, you see that jagged red line pointing straight down, and you can point your finger and say, they missed their quarterly earnings, or, they lost a major lawsuit. It's clean, it's categorized, and honestly, it's kind of comforting.
We definitely like our financial diagnoses to be, visible and easily explained. The market craves a direct cause and effect. If a trillion-dollar company takes a hit, investors want a precise X-ray showing exactly where the bone snapped.
Right. But then you step into the world of global semiconductor supply chains and deep ultraviolet lithography, and suddenly that X-ray machine is just completely broken. Because recently, a single news report wiped out 8% of a massive European tech giant's U.S. stock value in a matter of hours.
Yeah, ASML.
Right, ASML. I mean, it eventually closed down 5.8% for the day, but the panic was visceral. And the crazy part, ASML didn't actually do anything wrong. There was no missed earnings report.
No internal scandal, right.
Yeah.
What caused that stock to plummet wasn't an internal failure at all. It was an external announcement from halfway across the world that, it fundamentally challenged the market's core assumption about how the digital economy works.
And that is exactly what we are getting into today on this deep dive. We are looking at China's recent bombshell announcement that it has officially begun serial production of deep ultraviolet or DUV immersion lithography machines.
Which is a huge deal.
A massive deal. So our mission today is to separate the geopolitical hype from the actual hardware reality. Like, is this the end of a 40-year ironclad monopoly in chip manufacturing, or is this just, another premature promise?
It's a critical distinction to make, especially because we have to weigh state-backed corporate announcements against independent technical validation. We need to look at both the visceral market reaction and the actual unforgiving physics of what is supposedly being built here.
Definitely. And to do that, I've got a stack of sources we're pulling from today. I was looking through some recent reporting from Bloomberg, Reuters, and The Information. Plus, we've got technical analysis from Tom's Hardware and the South China Morning Post.
And that new independent research from the AI Futures Project, right?
Yes, exactly. Alongside some great expert industry commentary. So, okay, let's unpack this. Before we can understand why Wall Street had an absolute meltdown and sent ASML stock into a tailspin, we need to understand what these machines actually do.
Right.
And more importantly, why they are so famously just mind-bendingly impossible to build. So according to that reporting from The Information, which Reuters quickly backed up, they identified a state-backed company in Shanghai called Yuliangsheng Technology.
And they have known links to Huawei and SiCarrier.
Right. And they're claiming to mass produce the single most critical piece of equipment in the entire semiconductor value chain, the DUV immersion scanner.
So to really appreciate the audacity of that claim, we have to look at the mechanics. You know that lithography is essentially how microchips get made, but the scale is what usually trips people up.
Oh, for sure. To really visualize the absurdity of the engineering here, imagine shining a flashlight through an incredibly complex stencil. But in this case, the stencil is the size of a city block, and it contains a map of billions of intersecting roads.
That's a great way to picture it.
And then imagine you have to shrink that massive shadow down to the size of a fingernail using a series of flawlessly perfect magnifying glasses and imprint it onto a silicon wafer. And you have to do this thousands of times an hour, perfectly aligning it over previous layers without a single microscopic mistake.
The stenciling analogy is spot on. But here is where the physics of DUV deep ultraviolet immersion lithography create this massive bottleneck. You're limited by the wavelength of light. So DUV uses a specific laser that generates light at exactly 193 nanometers. But you're trying to draw lines on a chip that are significantly smaller than the wavelength of the light you're using to draw them. It's like trying to paint a masterpiece with a thick roller brush.
So how do you get a finer line out of a thick brush?
Well, you cheat physics. And the way they cheat physics in immersion lithography is by adding a highly purified layer of water between the machine's final lens and the silicon wafer itself.
Wait, I have to stop you there. Because putting water inside a machine that manufactures microscopic, hypersensitive electronics sounds like you're just asking for a catastrophic short circuit. Why water?
Yeah, it sounds counterintuitive. It comes down to the refractive index. Water has a higher refractive index than air. When light passes through the complex stencil, the mask, it diffracts, meaning it spreads out.
Right.
In air, a lot of those wider light rays just bounce away and miss the lens entirely, so you lose the sharp details of the image. But water bends that light inward. It allows the lens to capture a much wider angle of those diffracted rays.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in optics, this increases what's called the numerical aperture. By capturing more light, the resolution gets incredibly sharp, which allows them to manufacture chips at the 28 nanometer class in a single exposure.
And if they want to go smaller than 28 nanometers using this exact same machine?
Then they have to use a technique called multi-patterning. Since the light can't physically draw a thinner line, they draw the pattern once, then shift the wafer microscopically and draw another pattern right between the lines of the first one.
Oh, so you superimpose multiple exposures to carve out smaller features.
Exactly. But it's incredibly difficult because the alignment has to be flawless.
Okay, so that gets you down to maybe 7 nanometer or 5 nanometer chips if you push the multi-patterning to its absolute limit. But as advanced as DUV immersion is, independent tech analysts always draw a hard line between this and the next generation, right?
Bingo.
EUV, or extreme ultraviolet lithography.
And that distinction is vital. DUV is the absolute workhorse of the global economy. It makes the chips in your car, your appliances, your standard electronics. But EUV is the bleeding edge. EUV drops the wavelength from 193 nanometers all the way down to 13.5 nanometers.
And how do they generate light at 13.5 nanometers?
Yeah.
Reading the technical breakdowns on this, it honestly sounds completely unhinged.
It is. I mean, it is borderline science fiction. To get 13.5 nanometer light, you can't just use a standard laser. Inside an EUV machine, a laser fires at a microscopic droplet of molten tin as it falls through a vacuum chamber.
Okay.
And it hits that tin droplet 50,000 times a second, vaporizing it into a plasma that emits the extreme ultraviolet light.
Wait, tin plasma, you're telling me they're building miniature stars inside a factory just to print a microchip?
That is essentially what it is, yeah. And because that extreme light is so fragile, it gets absorbed by practically everything, including regular air. You can't use glass lenses anymore. Glass would just absorb the light.
So what do they use?
The entire optical system has to use ultra-pure vacuum mirrors to bounce the light toward the wafer. This EUV technology is completely exclusive to ASML right now, and it is entirely essential for making the most advanced NVIDIA GPUs, the ones powering modern artificial intelligence models.
Wow. Okay, so we have the Shanghai company, Yuliangsheng, claiming they are mass-producing the DUV immersion machines, the
Right.
workhorse machines, not the miniature star EUV machines.
Right.
But let's look at the numbers, because this is where the market panic starts to feel, I don't know, a bit disconnected from reality. Financial reporting notes that this Shanghai company is aiming to produce about 5 units in 2026 and maybe 20 units in 2027. But ASML expects to ship roughly 130 immersion systems in 2026 alone. Plus, they're planning a 30% capacity bump for 2027.
Yeah, and furthermore, independent research published just last month by the AI Futures Project estimates that ASML still controls 98.7% of the global market for immersion systems.
Right, so we are talking about 5 machines from China next year versus 130 from ASML. I just don't understand the 8% stock plunge. Is Wall Street just completely overreacting to a drop in the bucket?
Well, what's fascinating here is you have to view it through the psychology of a monopoly.
Hmm.
For almost 4 decades, essentially one company has held an absolute, undisputed stranglehold on this technology, the Netherlands and ASML.
Right.
The market priced ASML not just as a tech company, but as an irreplaceable utility for the digital age. Investors assumed the technological moat around ASML's castle was so deep and so wide that no one could ever cross it.
So it's not the volume that spooks them, it's the proof of concept. The moat has a bridge.
Precisely. 5 machines aren't going to upend ASML's quarterly revenue, but it signals that a parallel, fully independent supply chain is no longer theoretical. It's physical. It breaks the illusion of invulnerability.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If the production numbers are so incredibly small, just 5 machines next year, why is this announcement happening right now with such massive coordinated fanfare?
Right, the timing.
Yeah, I was cross-referencing the Bloomberg reporting with some legislative tracking, and there's a fascinating detail about the reported clients receiving these first few Chinese machines. It's SMIC, Hua Hong Semiconductor, and CXMT.
Right, which are China's largest logic chip maker and a major memory chip company, respectively.
Exactly. And currently, there's a bill advancing through the U.S. Congress that seeks to cut those exact 3 companies off entirely from any ASML sales or maintenance. Just a total absolute cutoff from the Dutch machines. And right as that specific legislation is moving forward in Washington, Beijing announces that those exact three companies are the ones receiving their new domestically produced DUV machines.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it becomes very clear that this announcement isn't just a technical update for investors or industry watchers. It is a highly strategic narrative. It's a geopolitical signal being broadcast loud and clear. It's saying to U.S. lawmakers, if you cut us off from the global supply, we already have our own domestic alternative ready to plug in.
And I want to be absolutely clear with you, the listener. We are not taking sides on the geopolitical chess match here. Our job is simply to map the timeline. The advancement of the U.S. legislation and the timing of the Chinese production announcement are completely interconnected events. It's an action and a reaction playing out in real time across the global supply chain.
It is. However, we do need to aggressively temper that strategic narrative with the unforgiving hardware reality. Tom's Hardware recently cited industry sources noting that Sepence has actually been testing a tool from Yuliangsheng since September 2025.
So it wasn't an overnight miracle pulled out of a hat.
Exactly. And while the machine is described by state media as being built with domestic Chinese components, independent reporting confirms it still heavily relies on some imported parts from outside of China.
Which brings up the issue of trust. Because if this announcement serves a political purpose as much as a technical one, how much can we actually trust the technical claims? Haven't we seen this movie before? I vaguely remember a massive announcement a few years ago that just completely vanished.
You're thinking of 2023. William Bevington, an analyst at Jefferies, specifically pointed this out in a recent research note. A different Chinese company, SME Shanghai Microelectronics Equipment, claimed on social media that they had developed a 28-nanometer machine.
Right, I remember this. They claimed they solved it, and then nothing. They quietly retracted the announcement. SME currently only has about a 4% market share globally, and that's entirely for older generation, much less demanding chips.
Yeah, so there is absolutely a history of exaggerated claims, which creates a healthy skepticism. But Paul Triolo from the DGA Albright Stonebridge Group brings up the most critical technical reality check of all. He notes that the real challenge in lithography isn't building a prototype in a lab or even delivering the first 5 machines. The challenge is running that machine 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, completely stably.
Because if it breaks down, a multi-billion-dollar fabrication plant just grinds to a halt.
It's actually much more insidious than a complete breakdown. It's about what the industry calls yield. Yield is the percentage of usable working chips you get from a single silicon wafer.
Okay.
A fully processed wafer can be worth tens of thousands of dollars. Now, remember the multi-patterning we talked about earlier?
Shifting the stencil to draw lines between lines?
Exactly. When you do that, your alignment or your overlay accuracy has to be perfect down to the nanometer. But these machines generate massive amounts of heat from the lasers, which causes the metal components inside to expand and contract microscopically.
Oh.
If the lens vibrates, or if the wafer table shifts by a fraction of a single nanometer, the patterns don't align. The chips on that wafer are ruined. Your yield plummets.
So a lithography machine isn't just a printer. It's a probability machine.
That is the perfect way to frame it. ASML's true product isn't just the ability to print tiny lines, it's stability over time. If your machine is slightly unstable, your yield drops from 90% to 40%, and suddenly your chips are too expensive to be commercially viable. Achieving that high yield is something ASML spent decades refining through incremental, agonizingly slow improvements. You don't just replicate decades of troubleshooting overnight.
That makes total sense. And honestly, it explains why ASML's executives seem completely unbothered. In their July 2026 earnings call, their CEO and CFO basically acknowledged the Chinese competition, but entirely maintained their own massive capacity expansion plans. They clearly don't see this as an existential threat to their bottom line right now.
They don't, because they know that proving a technology in a test environment is miles away from guaranteeing 95% yield at high-volume manufacturing.
But let's look forward. Say they absolutely nail this DUV machine. Say Yuliangsheng figures out the thermal expansion, they get the yield up, and it runs perfectly. Does that mean they can easily leverage that momentum and level up to the miniature star tin plasma EUV technology next?
The consensus from across all our technical sources is a resounding no. The jump from DUV by immersion to EUV is not a linear step. It requires mastering a completely different paradigm of physics. Analysts consistently describe Chinese EUV capability as being completely out of reach in the short to medium term.
But I was reading through the AI Futures Project data, and they do highlight some domestic breakthroughs in China regarding EUV building blocks, don't they?
They highlight laboratory breakthroughs, which is a crucial distinction. For instance, a team at Tsinghua University recently announced progress on EUV photoresists.
Remind me, a photoresist is the chemical layer on the wafer.
Yes, it's the light-sensitive chemical you coat the silicon with before you expose it. Currently, the dominant suppliers for advanced photoresists are Japanese. If those chemicals fail at scale, your yield drops to zero. So developing a domestic photoresist using a different chemistry is a huge step. Additionally, a team at the Shanghai Institute of Optics and Fine Mechanics achieved a breakthrough in laser plasma generation in early 2025.
So they're actively researching the building blocks, the chemicals, the plasma lasers.
Yes, but we come back to the yield problem. A successful lab experiment is vastly different from a commercial factory tool until you master what's called atomic scale metrology, which is the hyper-precise science of measuring things so perfectly that you know where individual atoms are sitting. You cannot ensure the layers align. Until you solve that, you have a laboratory prototype, not mass manufacturing.
Speaking of alternative tech, I noticed a detail in the South China Morning Post analysis about a machine in Hangzhou. The municipal government there announced a machine with 0.6 nanometer precision. They named it after a famous calligrapher, Wang Shizi. 0.6 nanometer sounds like it completely obliterates the EUV limits we just spent 20 minutes talking about.
It's a great detail to catch, but it's a completely different underlying technology. The Wang Shizi machine uses electron beam lithography. DUV and EUV use optical lithography. They flash an entire complex pattern onto a designated area of the chip all at once, kind of like a camera flash.
Right.
Electron beam lithography works more like a pencil. It shoots a beam of electrons to draw the pattern sequentially, pixel by pixel.
Meaning it's incredibly precise, but incredibly slow.
Exactly. It takes exponentially longer to draw the pattern. It is incredibly useful for certain niche research applications or making the initial stencils themselves, but it's effectively useless for the high-volume, rapid mass manufacturing of logic chips that run the global economy.
Okay, so EUV optical lithography is still securely locked in ASML's vault for the foreseeable future. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've talked about nanometers, we've talked about stock market psychology, miniature stars, and shifting stencils. But how does this invisible war actually affect the technology in your hands right now?
Well, it dictates the foundation of your digital life. The availability, the yield, and the cost of these advanced chips determine the cost of the artificial intelligence models you interact with daily. The massive data centers supporting crypto exchanges, fintech platforms, and cloud computing, they all rely on a continuous, affordable supply of logic chips.
And if ASML remains the absolute only game in town, they dictate the pace and the price of that infrastructure worldwide.
Precisely. Breaking that Dutch and Japanese monopoly on lithography could eventually diversify the global supply chain. If there is genuine high-yield competition, it could alter global semiconductor prices and change how quickly advanced computing gets cheaper and more accessible. But, based on the current data, that commercial reality where Chinese DUV genuinely impacts global supply volumes and pricing is pushed all the way out to the mid-2030s.
So we are looking at a story of gradual, uncertain progress rather than an overnight revolution. Let's pull all of this together. China has undoubtedly achieved a real, multi-source, verified, and incredibly impressive milestone by beginning serial production of DUV immersion machines. They have proven they can build a map projector. They crossed the moat.
Yes, a milestone that happened much faster than many external analysts predicted. But the production volumes are a tiny fraction of ASML's output, and the true test of commercial viability, the brutal physics of high yield, is a hurdle they still have to clear. And most importantly, ASML's dominance in the next generation EUV technology remains completely untouched.
It's a fascinating reality check. We started this deep dive talking about how we expect clean diagnoses when we look at the stock market. Wall Street saw the headline, "China mass produces lithography," and immediately diagnosed the end of ASML's reign, dropping their value by billions in a matter of hours.
But when you actually look closer at the diagnostic image, when you understand the physics of yield, the scale of production, and the massive plasma-filled canyon between DUV and EUV, the reality is much more complex.
It is incredibly murky. But I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on today, something that builds on the realities we found in these sources. We noted earlier that while this new Chinese DUV machine is hailed as a triumph of domestic engineering, independent reporting confirms it still relies on some imported parts from outside the country. Makes you wonder. As nations spend billions trying to build these monolithic, vertically integrated supply chains to protect themselves from export controls, What if the real choke point of the future isn't the giant multi-million-dollar lithography scanner itself?
Right. This touches on a fundamental vulnerability in globalized manufacturing.
Exactly. What if the thing that brings a $20 billion fabrication plant to a grinding halt isn't the lack of a scanner, but a highly specialized $50 valve? Or a tiny imported lens hidden deep inside the cooling system? In a world with supply chains, this microscopic and interconnected, true 100% self-sufficiency might just be the biggest illusion of all.
It's a sobering thought. I mean, a machine designed to manipulate individual atoms can still be broken by a single missing screw.
It really can. Thank you, as always, for coming along on this deep dive with us today. Keep learning, keep questioning the headlines, and we will catch you next time.